afternoon. My name is Maurizio Rossetto, and I'm the head of the Research Center for Ecosystem Resilience at the Botanic Gardens in Sydney. Today, I want to talk about Restore and Renew and the Restore and Renew web tool. But before launching into that, I just want to remind you all that Restore and Renew relies on a complex workflow that gathers genetic, ecological, environmental, distributional information in a cost-effective way across multiple species. In fact, we've worked on more than 120 species so far. Such data can not only be used to learn more about the biology of the species, but it can also be used to develop practical applications such as the Restore and Renew web tool, where we empirically define species-specific genetic provenance boundaries. So let's have a look at this web tool. As you get into the page, you are presented with a map, and just a reminder that for the moment, most of the data is from New South Wales. And from that map, you can select your site of interest where we are doing your restoration. And then in the left, from a drop-down menu, you can select the species that you're interested in, if we have data for it, of course. The tool will then calculate automatically what the limits of the local genetic boundary provenance for the species are. And this is the white highlighted area here. You can also obtain more information on areas that have similar environmental conditions than your site in purple shading, not highlighted here. But probably more interesting, you can get information on those areas that are currently experiencing the conditions that your site will experience in 2070 in the orange highlighted here. And this is if you're interested in future-proofing your plantings. All the information can be printed on a PDF together with other information about the biology of the species and how the suitable habitat will be impacted by climate change. This is what the web tool produces for now, but we are constantly looking at improving it and making it more easy to use. And so we are planning to do in the future some updates. Currently, most of the Restore and Renew work is revolving around externally funded projects that have their own Restore and Renew focused objectives, but that we are hoping will provide us with the opportunity to further advance some analytical approaches and concepts that are broadly applicable, not only to this project, and that can be then also used for the web tool. So for instance, one of the things that we're interested in is in using predefined seed collection zones. Those can be empirically defined by genomic data, as we just seen a couple of seconds ago, or they can be predefined geopolitical, vegetational, LLSs, whatever, existing areas. Once we're happy with those areas, the definition of those areas, then we will be able to provide seed collection zone specific guidelines for each species on, for example, how to establish diverse and climate-ready seed production areas to service the community, how to ensure that we can establish evolutionary representative seed collections, again, to service or to conserve diversity. And we'll also be able to give a range of scenarios on how to maximize short and long-term fitness for restoration plantings. So this is where we're heading to. Hopefully this is of interest and it will make this data information much more accessible. Before I finish, I would like to draw your attention to other applications of the Restore and Renew workflow, in particular in relation to threatened species and the SOS program here in New South Wales. And Sam tomorrow will present on this and will show how we can get multiple applied outcomes from one single analysis or one single workflow. And also tomorrow, Stephanie will present on how we are developing a similar but two-step approach to a process on how to manage species that are currently threatened by myrtle rust. Before I close, I just want to draw finally your attention on a workshop, a free workshop that we're running at the Botanic Gardens on those kind of issues in May. And I would also like to thank you all and for your interest.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this brief introduction to plant data on the Atlas of Living Australia. My name is Dr. Jenna Wraith, and I'm the Training and Outreach Coordinator here at the Atlas. The Atlas of Living Australia is a one-stop shop for researchers and decision makers to access trusted biodiversity data and services, and we really pride ourselves on being collaborative, open, accessible, and usable. For example, currently the Atlas has over 100 million species occurrence records, of which nearly all is open and freely available for you to use. The ALA shares infrastructure with over 27 different countries and has over 750 partnerships. Our data facilitates incredible research and has been used in over 2,000 scientific publications. Plant data on the ALA is really extensive. Currently, we have over 21 million occurrence records for around 38,000 plant species. The most recorded family on the Atlas is Poaceae, and it has around 2.5 million records. This is followed closely by Fabaceae, Myrtaceae, and Asteraceae. Fabaceae is also the most speciose family, with occurrence records for over 3,400 different species. And although it's tricky to see here, 44 plant families on the Atlas have over 10,000 occurrence records, and 65 families have records for over 100 species. And the collection of plant data has really increased, and it started to increase rapidly from around the 1960s, and it continues to increase steadily, particularly for human observations. Museum specimen collections are beginning to plateau, particularly since around the early 2000s, which is expected due to the limited capacity and resourcing of collections. And you can see here on the second graph that the collection of the most commonly collected families follows a really similar trend. But what it also shows is how much data we have for these 4 families compared to all other families on the Atlas. And we can also show some sampling trends by looking at data from the ALA. For example, we really have an abundance of data for plants along the southeast coast, in Tasmania, and also in the southwest of Western Australia. But we definitely can see some gaps as well, and you can see these in the arid regions of Central Australia and also in the tropical north. The ALA is always searching for new data to include, and we rely heavily on researchers and citizen scientists. So if you have some data that could fill in these gaps, please consider sharing it with us. I'm now going to show you a demonstration of how you can use the Atlas of Living Australia to search for a species. In this example, I'm using the river red gum, and it's as simple as typing it in, hitting search, and you can see a whole wealth of data that we have here. You can click through all of these different data sets, including classifications, literature, different records, as well as Indigenous names. Here you can view the records. You can filter these records by using data profiles that allow you to exclude suspect records, ensuring you have data quality, or you can filter using other facets such as location, record type, and attribution. You can also view data on a map, and you can download it this way as well. You can view charts and record images and download the dataset. Here you can choose to download it in full Darwin Core, and you can choose what file type. Once you hit download, an email will be sent to you, and you can click that once it's ready and access the dataset. So if you would like to learn more about the Atlas of Living Australia, please head to our website at ala.org.au. And if you're interested in hosting a workshop at your work or institution, please send us an email at outreach@ala.org.au. I would also like to briefly introduce our grant program that we have at the moment called the ALA Australian Biodiversity Data Mobilisation Program. So this is intended for you to be able to share your data with the Atlas and provide some funding to get some of that data from dusty drawers, laptops or hard drives and into a Darwin Core format. So please head to our website if you're interested in applying. Applications close on the 11th of April. Thanks so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy using the Atlas of Living Australia. See you next time.
Hi, I'm Rob from the EcoCommons team, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about the ecological modeling platform that is EcoCommons, and I'll demonstrate how to run a species distribution model real quickly. But first, I just want to highlight that EcoCommons has this massive vision to empower researchers and decision makers to protect and restore the planet. And we're looking to do that by giving you tools, by drawing on our partners, our collaborators, and top scientists to provide ecological data, robust scientific workflows, and digital infrastructure. And this foundation provides users a way to quickly turn noisy ecological data into high-quality, reproducible results. So you don't need coding skills. We have a point-and-click environment. You don't need expensive equipment. You can run these experiments on the cloud. We offer training, so you can learn more about these models, and you can dig into the weeds if you want to, and learn some coding skills, and run that code on the cloud. And it's a great platform to learn about modeling, and to learn about new algorithms that you've never tried before. And importantly, all our infrastructure is built on flexible architecture, so it can be deployed for other projects, and it's currently being deployed for the Biosecurity Commons project. So it's very collaborative. So currently you can do a lot of things on EcoCommons today. Again, we're just going to talk about species distribution modeling. If any of this is of interest, you can visit our website, you can watch some videos or sign up for a newsletter. And if you want to give our platform a test drive, you can go to the app.ecocommons.org.au website and look at the pre-release version. So we don't launch until November 2022, but you can give it a test drive, see what's there. Click the sign in button. Try the red button to sign in. If that doesn't work for you, just send us an email and we can give you a username and password. Once you enter the platform, you'll see all of our environmental data. You can search through that data. You can look at the metadata of that data. You can download that data. You can preview that data. And then you can go into your workspace and you can grab some maybe occurrence records from the Atlas of Living Australia, for example. Once you've got your data sorted, you can go into a modeling wizard, which is a point-and-click environment to run your models. And here we're going to click on Species Distribution Modeling Experiment. We're going to study a species of Banksia, download those occurrence records, choose how we're going to deal with absence data, select some environmental data and some climate data, draw your study area on the map or choose another way to pick your study area, then pick which algorithms you want to run, so there's quite a few that you can run, and specify the arguments for those models. And when you click run, you'll get, this is the predicted distribution of that species of Banksia. This is that predicted distribution in 2085. So you can see there's changes there and under climate change. And you can look at things like diagnostic plots, diagnostic statistics, or you can download all that R code and go through it in detail if you want to. And then you can launch a server. You can launch a server using Python, R, or RStudio. And RStudio looks just like it would if you were running it on your home PC. So we're really excited about what's coming to EcoCommons. We've got things like community modeling, generalized dissimilarity modeling that's coming soon, risk mapping, so if you want to kind of predict where invasive species might end up. Some really cool functionality that's coming soon. I encourage you to check us out at app.ecocommons.org.au and give us some feedback. There's a little feedback tab on the right side. You can tell us what you like and what you don't like. Anyway, that's it for me. Just want to say none of this is possible without our partners. And enjoy the conference. I wish I was there with you. Bye.
Hi, I'm Carolena Helderman. I work for Goulbourn Landcare Network as a biodiversity officer, and I do revegetation works for the Goulbourn CMA. And I'm here to show you their revegetation tool. It was based on the book, and it was converted to the online tool, which is on their website, Goulbourn CMA. So let's start by looking at the planning project. We're looking here at the planning. Sometimes I forward this link to landholders, and they might be looking at what they're trying to achieve, what the indigenous vegetation is or was, the ecological vegetation classes, and it outlines all these things to give them a better idea. They then understand their planting profile, the location, whether it's on hills, depressions, plains, steepness of slope, the geology and soil types. We then really go into what the revegetation zones are, and there are 12 in the region. It'd be good to switch off emails though. There are 12 in the region, and the lines on the map show this, and it's interactive, which is really handy. So if I'm going out to the Riverina, Victorian Riverina section around Shepparton, Kyabram, Tatura, I'll click on that there, and that will show me the Victorian Riverina vegetation zone. This gives a brief description of the vegetation, gives some examples, and then we look at the maps to see what the EVC would tell us. So how do you find the EVC? Well, we have our own mapping tool for the ecological vegetation classes, but I also point people to the Nature Kit, which they can go to and zoom in on a map, have the vegetation class selected on the left, and it will show on the map. In this case, I've selected Round Tatura, and it's showing that it's a plains woodland, EVC 803. So once I know the EVC, what I do is I scroll down, and you can see the EVCs listed here. So I'm looking for plains woodland, which is here. I then want to have a look at the species list for the plantings. So on a visit, I would have gone to this tool, I would have printed a species list. So we have our standard revegetation, our enhanced, and our full EVC species list. So it's mainly the enhanced I would print out, but let's have a look at the full list. We've got our trees here. We've got notes on whether it's suited to more wetter circumstances, etc. And we've got our ground covers, and the footnotes are there. So this is a really good guide for me to get an idea of what type of vegetation will be on site, and I will print that list as such. There might be more than one EVC on that property, so I take that plant list to give to the landholder. But it's also a basis of discussion. Are we seeing this vegetation? Are we is it wrong? Is there a species list or a EVC that may be closer to it? And so this is our basis for me to get an idea of what vegetation may go back into the landscape. So this is an excellent tool for not only the facilitators, for me as a biodiversity officer, but also for landholders. So it's an essential tool for me, and easy to use, easy to come back to, easy to point people to give a better idea. But it really is something that I use for choosing my tube stock for planting in funded projects, and also for direct seeding. So that's about it, wrapping that up, and I hope you take a look, and it's certainly a great tool. Cheers, bye.
We've got time for some questions. Excuse me, I'll ignore that, it's the bus. Yeah, we've got some time for questions. Questions from the audience. Do we get the mic around?
I was just wondering if these apps, how you cope with the situation where you've got a species which occurs in another region and it's become a weed in the region you're interested in. For instance, we have Acacia etophilia, which is in central Flinders Ranges in South Australia. It's become a weed in the southern lofty ranges, but on species lists it often comes there. If you search on an area, it'll come up as a native species there. So wondering how you overcome that problem.
Would someone like to field that? You're pointing to any particular one of the apps in the veg guides? I don't think it would be an issue.
Where the example we had was someone produced for an area the species of plants they should plant in their area, and they would have gone to that region. It would use ALA and all sorts of databases. So I don't know, the last speaker maybe.
Yeah, with the veg guides, I think you'd be covered.
Yeah, we're just covering the species that would have been in that area or was advised to be there. So it wouldn't come into play with what you're mentioning.
So it wouldn't come as even though it's a native for the state, it wouldn't come up as. There's a way of differentiating between where it occurs naturally in an area, a region, as opposed to occurring in a region.
Look, and sometimes I've pointed landholders exactly to Atlas of Living Australia because, and also for species of animals that might be dotted in that region. So you might more likely see it via the atlas if it's been mapped than a vegetation guide of what should be in that landscape.
It's not, the veg guides are not intended to be a list of species that are located. It's an outline of the species that would have naturally occurred in that area, whereas ALA is a listing of all findings.
Right, so there's not an app where you can actually you create your own list for your own property just based on. So all the stuff is filtered, is it, before it goes out to landowners?
Probably ALA was where you would go here to list what's on your property.
ALA would say it's native, and it wouldn't.
Not necessarily. No. It'll just have the species, and if it's been recorded there, the dot will appear on that map.
Okay, yeah, that's a problem in South Australia, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. So there was going to be a speaker today talking about an app that you can use for mapping trees on your property and tracking seed collections and things like that. So I'm happy to pass on details. She was badly flood affected recently and, yeah, couldn't make it. But if you're interested in that kind of mapping on the property.
No, I'm just interested in overcoming that problem we've got in South Australia. People use, we've got nature maps, for instance, in South Australia, and people look up species for the area they're interested in, and these species which have become weeds outside their natural region come up, and people use it. You know, Acacia longifolia in Balea National Park. It's a weed, but people think it's a native there.
But I think that's one of the reasons and justifications, I believe, for having these regional vegetation guides right across Australia, that they're already being vetted for those anomalies that show up. And that's documented, that, you know, some people do believe that there's a suite of species in various locations that are native and locally native, and that's why you should be preparing these these lists, one of the prime arguments is, how do you restore something back if you don't know what should be there? And I think that's one of the first of the elements that we should be looking at as a state and national program, of having these sorts of veg guides for every region. And it also leads into all the sort of genetics information then, of identifying the plants between regions, and the seed collection zones, and then the seed transfer zones. All these things are linked, and I believe that we can't really have an effective national restoration programs unless we've got these basic tools in place first.
Thank you, that was great. With ALA, are they obtaining data from other databases or sharing data with other databases like iNaturalist, Victorian Biodiversity Atlas, Bird Data and all that?
Yep, all of the above, yeah.
Oh, great. And how regular is that?
So with iNaturalist, we automatically get data every week, and we feed in all that data, yeah. And with other ones, maybe not as regular, but there are sort of different situations with each one where we get and share data. And then we share all of our data with GBIF, so the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, so it's available globally. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenna. Again to Jenna. How does ALA handle revisions? Do you immediately accept them, or do you wait for some sort of acceptance? Or I mean, I've got examples, but I'm not going to bore you with them. But I'm just wondering how you deal with it.
Yeah, sure. So do you mean revisions if a point is sort of identified in a spot and you don't think that's right?
No.
Or taxonomy?
Taxonomy. Yeah.
Yes. Taxonomy is a decent issue with the Atlas, so it's something that we're consistently trying to work with. So for plants, our taxonomy comes from the Australian Plant Consensus, and we're currently in conversation at the moment to try and sort of revise and update things that they need to be done, yeah. But if you have something specific, just get in touch with us, and that would be really helpful.
Anthony Whalen from the Australian Biological Resources Study. Just a quick note on that. Some of the data relating to taxonomic revisions we put into our various databases, and that gets fed up to the Atlas of Living Australia. So I think ALA would see themselves more as data aggregators, and we try and come in and do the actual taxonomic updates. Thank you.
Bob Mankinson from Sydney. I want to ask the flip of the one that John just asked. He was asking about taxonomic revisions, but I'll take you up on the point about geographic point revisions with ALA and how are they handled, because for a long time it seemed to be that corrective information could be sent in, but it sort of went into a void, and I appreciate that correcting it back to the home herbarium or the home museum is a real problem, both of labour and communication and resource time, but how's it being handled now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we did a big revision of data quality, I think last year now, and we have these new assertions put in place. So they're annotations and assertions, and you can go in as a user. If you find like a point is not correct, you can actually put sort of a dot on that and it will appear as an assertion, and that will become instantly available for anyone else to see, and then we'll look at that case-by-case basis.
Hi, we've got an online question to any presenter. It's from Kate, and it is there a revegetation guide app for use in New South Wales that you know of?
My understanding, someone's got a point to make, yes?
Yeah, to Kate, if she just hangs on till the next round, I'm presenting on another app called Trees Near Me that includes modelled and mapped pre-1750 plant communities and vegetation. So, yeah, if she stays tuned, she'll hear more.
Thank you.
Yeah, with regard to apps, I did a bit of as part of the Healthy Seeds program, looking at those LLS regions that had vegetation guides. There is quite a number. I think there's about 7 or 8 across the state of the 12 or 13 that have hard copies. Most of them have lapsed. Some need updating, but there's none like Victoria that have gone online as working apps, as far as I'm aware. But I think it's a project that really needs to be looked at in New South Wales and in the other states.
Hey Maurizio, this is one for you. I haven't looked on Restore and Renew for a few years, and I always thought this was such a cool project, but I just wanted to clarify, because I'm on the website now. Your site matching tool is Australia-wide, but your informed palette, your species restoration, is that just New South Wales, or is that Australia-wide as well?
For the moment, most of the data comes from New South Wales, but we have an increasing number of species, particularly in Queensland and coming down to Victoria now. So it is Australia-wide. I mean, obviously, when you're doing site matching, there's no point on limiting to the local. But yeah, we're working our way through the species. We're trying.
Thanks. Maurizio, I just wanted you to explain, the zone, sorry, the zone in which the provenances should be taken from. Maybe it'd be helpful to spend a minute or two explaining how that's derived for people who might use it.
Thank you, Rachel. It was a bit hard to try to pack it all in the 5 minutes, and also, I wanted to talk about future things as well. But so the zones are based on empirical data, and so the way we calculate it is we base it on natural levels of gene flow. So by looking at natural level of gene flow, we know what the connectivity is across the landscape, and we can then define this area that way. And that can all be done by sampling the species throughout the distribution, so you see how connectivity changes through the landscape. What we'll find, and going back to some of the issues that we discussed this morning, is that in most cases, provenances, what you call provenances, I actually don't like the word, I use it because it's the word that is commonly used, but natural genetic neighborhoods, so where individuals pretty much have not continuous, but have gene flow, are much, much bigger than what we think. In some cases, in many cases, they are statewide. But the issue to remember is that one of the unfortunate things that we found is that you can't really generalize. So we published a paper a few years ago where we looked at phylocaceae that are co-distributed. They're often found in sympatry, and they have very, very different, all 5 of them have very, very different natural neighborhood. So that's a difficulty. We're not at the stage where we can make absolute generalization. If you do this, you'll be fine. But to be quite honest, I think it will always be safer to err on expanding your range than in bringing it narrow. The danger of bringing it narrow in most cases are much greater than if you expand it. And just to elaborate on that, that's one of the things I was mentioning there. What we are trying to focus now is more to work towards a user end type of thing. What do you want as a user? Do you want to have an idea of the Murray region? Do you want to have an idea of that community? Do you want to have an idea of that group of species? And then if we can do if we can predefine what your interests are, it is much easier for us then to provide you with much more specific guidelines than just saying, collect from this area and try to sample widely within that area. We can come down to the details on how to sample, how many locations to sample, how many individuals to sample. And that's why I'm very keen to follow on from these meetings after having met some of you that do this fantastic work to try to explore what is already being done and try to see how we can help in that way. Because there's also a scale thing, right? For example, and Sam will talk tomorrow about threatened species. Threatened species are easy. They're just very, very narrow distribution, it's easy for us to tell you exactly what to do. You know, when Andy today was talking about thousands of individuals, that starts to be a little bit more complicated, and we have to be a little bit more careful. But we want to be able to help you there, and we want to be in a position where you don't have to come to us for every question. We want to be able to have on the web tool eventually solutions that are more broadly applicable. That's the plan.
Looks like we've run out of questions, and our next sequence is about 10 minutes away, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah.
According to our timesheet.
Just ask the AV if they're able to play it now.
Right, okay. Are we able to play the next sequence of videos now?
Yep.
We can? Okay, if you want to announce those then.
Yep. And Martin? And get the next group of presenters.
Presenters, and if those of you that are here could come up and sit at the table with us, please. The next of a lot of presenters is Tim Collins from DPAE, New South Wales DPAE. Melinda Pickup, that we met yesterday already in her great presentation from Green Australia. And Peter Harrison from the University of Tasmania. He will be joining online. So if we can start rolling those three, please.
My name is Tim Collins. Today I'm presenting on the Trees Near Me New South Wales app on behalf of the Department of Planning and Environment. I am taking the place of Dr. Adam Roth, who unfortunately wasn't able to make the conference. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land around Albury, the Wiradjuri people, and the traditional owners from where I'm presenting in Canberra, the Ngunnawal. In the spirit of reconciliation, I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Trees Near Me New South Wales is a new app available for Android and Apple. It's driven by data from the New South Wales State Vegetation Type Map and provides anyone with a phone or tablet the power to identify native vegetation plant community types, or PCTs. The New South Wales State Vegetation Type Map, or SVTM, represents the most complete and consistent information about the distribution of PCTs across New South Wales, benefiting landholders, planners and local communities. We took a systematic approach to map PCTs based on vegetation plot data, detailed aerial photographic interpretation and machine learning. Our SVTM methodology applied a hierarchical approach where groups of co-occurring species were successively delineated into smaller subsets at progressively finer spatial scales. Our approach maps PCTs across the entire landscape, even in areas that have been cleared. We used the New South Wales native vegetation extent to remove cleared vegetation from the map to capture current patterns of native vegetation. Trees Near Me displays both current day vegetation mapping as well as a snapshot of the type of vegetation that would have existed before clearing. You just select the map you're interested in. It's easy to switch between current day vegetation and vegetation extent before clearing. We worked hard to make Trees Near Me simple to use and fast to respond to your inputs. Just open the app and go to your current location or pinch to zoom to an area of interest. Map layers include satellite imagery, terrain and colour-coded plant community types. Here we see plant community types in current day on the left and pre-clearing on the right. Now displayed is terrain view on the left and satellite imagery on the right, with the PCTs now in colour on the left, and a close-up of Murrumarang National Park PCTs and satellite imagery on the right. Without the Trees Near Me app, even a simple vegetation query has been a lot of work, whether it's finding and downloading the maps, looking up community descriptions, or finding information about a single species. Now you can do it all in one place intuitively on your phone. Go to any location and select a plant community type near you. Trees Near Me provides a detailed description of the community, including a full species list. Selecting an individual species will guide you to internet results such as PlantNet or Wikipedia. You can share your location via an email or web link, and the app will generate a custom web page for that location. The Trees Near Me maps will also be available on the New South Wales Government data portal, seed.nsw.gov.au. Seed now allows users to provide direct spatial feedback on vegetation in their neighbourhood. The state vegetation type map is regularly updated and will respond to new data as it is collected. We're planning to release the Trees Near Me app in June 2022 to coincide with the Trees Near Me website launch. The website will provide the same functionality, but with the advantage of using your computer's larger screen resolution. You can provide feedback via the Seed portal or directly to me via email, tim.collins@environment.nsw.gov.au. Thanks for listening.
Part of the science and design team at Greening Australia. So today I'm going to be talking to you about seeding resilience. So what can we do to restore populations, species and communities in a rapidly changing world? But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Whadjuk Noongar country and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So when we're thinking about climate-adjusted provenancing, we're thinking about sourcing seed along a known climate gradient, with the goal being to bring in genetic diversity without swamping out local variation. But it's really important to have tools that can help us inform this seed collection process. So one of the main messages that's come out with working with our GIS model is it really matters where you're implementing your revegetation restoration and what species you're working with, because these will together will determine the where and the how of seed collection. So if I illustrate this through a species Goulbourn ovata, and we're thinking about going into the priority area around the Watts River catchment. So this is identified by the purple region in this map. So all of the maps I'll show you will be set up in the same way. So we have our priority revegetation area in purple, and each of the coloured dots represents a climate analogue, which is a location that represents what that priority area is likely to look like at a certain time period. So the blue being 2030, green being 2050, yellow being 2070, and the red being 2090 and beyond. So that gives you an idea about if you were to implement a climate adjusted approach, where would you have to go and where would you want to sample from to sample the climate analogues into the future. So the other bit of information we have on this map is the grey areas shading that represents the IBRA bioregions, which illustrates some of the other environmental variation that might be underlying some of these populations, which you can inform your climate adjusted approach. But what happens if we went to a catchment that was close by but more arid? And one of the take-home messages here is that it's likely to reduce the number of climate analogues that you have available and their distribution. So if they're more arid baseline to start with, then you're probably going to have fewer and more limited options for climate adaptation and a climate adjusted approach. So the second important point in our GIS model is that seasonality is really important. So when we think about a lot of these climate projections can be based on annual average temperature and rainfall, but of course if you go across the year, this can mask seasonal differences. And we know for plants that when rainfall occurs at particular times of the year can be really important. So I'm going to illustrate this with an example of Casuarina faciliata, which is the drooping she oak and restoration on the Fleurieu Peninsula, illustrated by the purple region here. So each of these coloured dots again represents a climate analogue based on that annual temperature and rainfall. But interestingly, if we compare this to what are the projections if we're thinking about winter rainfall and winter temperatures, and that's where you get a different pattern. So the number of climate analogues shifts, so you have fewer climate analogues, and what they represent can be really quite different whether you're looking at annual averages versus seasonal. And this can be really important for plant physiology, stress response, and reproduction. So going back over to Melbourne, this is just another point that's come out of our model that's important to consider, that it's really about the projected changes in aridity that matter. So if we look at the map here, this is looking at aridity based on the annual heat moisture index, which is essentially an index that takes temperature and rainfall together to give you an idea about how arid a location is, knowing that aridity can increase by increasing temperature and declining rainfall in combination. So this illustrates a nice west-east gradient around the Melbourne area that they have in aridity. So this is all based on baseline, but what about percentage changes in aridity? This is where it gets quite interesting to think about how climate risk has, and looking at changes in aridity as one measure of climate risk is not uniform across an area. So on this map here, we're looking at the projected changes in aridity to 2050. So the yellow being where the aridity is going to increase by about 4%. But as you go to the dark orange and red, we're looking about changes in aridity of between 11 and 28% more arid in these locations to 2050. And that's really not a lot of time when you think about approximately 28 years, particularly in terms of some of the life history traits and the lifespan of species we might be dealing with. So the toolbox and the ways forward, we want to combine this GIS tools with plant trait information, other environmental variation and variables that are important for each species, and if it's available, any information on genetic and genomic data. And put all of this in an M&E framework to think about how can we measure this now, medium and short term, and set it up so in the future we could look at signals and strength of selection and how populations might respond to selection over generations. So thank you for your attention today, and if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you.
Today I'll be presenting a tool that we have developed in collaboration with Green Australia to identify seed sources for restoration. As we all know, climates are rapidly changing. Over the last 100 years, temperatures have increased by nearly 1 degree centigrade, and this relatively small change is already having catastrophic impacts on our forest ecosystems, leading to range-wide dieback, but also shifts in the performance of populations, which is resulting in the local not always being best. To build climate resilience in our restoration plantings, to ensure what we plant now will be around for the next 100 or more years, we need to start building genetic diversity in our seed mixes. One of the leading approaches to achieve this is to mix local seed with seed from populations already growing in future climates. To assist in the identification of populations already growing in future climates for a site, we have developed a desktop tool called Provenancing using climate analogues, or simply Pickup. This tool takes a multivariate approach to identify the key independent climate gradients that have likely shaped adaptive variation in a species. This approach is very flexible, repeatable, and able to be used anywhere. This is the main console of Pickup, which has 3 main options which I'll step through now. The first option allows you to identify the species that occur on or near the site being restored. It does this by accessing ALA's distribution data as well as global datasets such as GBIF. It provides the flexibility to return just plant species or animal species or both animal and plants. When you hit Find Species, it returns all the unique species in a given radius. You then have the ability to map the species distribution as well as download its distribution records. The second option then allows you either to use your own climate data, or if you don't have your own climate data, it provides access to download well-climmed data for multiple global circulation models at various temporal as well as spatial scales. The last option is the main powerhouse of the program. This is where you can simultaneously identify seed sources matching future climates for multiple species. There are a few parameters that need to be set, but the default options are usually fine for most circumstances. After entering the geographic coordinates for the site being restored, selecting the species that you want to match and the global circulation models that you want to use, and hitting run, the program will then output heat maps like this for Eucalyptus ovata. Here, the site being restored at Cressy in the Tasmanian Midlands is shown by the black dot. Under current climates, the best seed sources are generally local, shown here by the hotter colours. But as we step through time, the best matched seed sources tend to come from sites or populations that are non-local. By the end of this century, there are no seed sources in Tasmania that are matched to this site for Eucalyptus ovata. Including the heat maps, the program will also return a list of the best populations to sample, including the nearest town and the population's geographic coordinates. It also identifies whether the matched population is fragmented, giving the ability to make informed decisions if to sample from a fragmented site or a site where the forest is more continuous. This tool is currently undergoing a revamp, and I'm hoping to launch the next version by the middle of this year. The above mentioned functions will still be available with additional features added. I'm happy to run through this in more detail, so please email me if you are interested. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Tim, Melinda and Peter. We'll switch to the traditional question and answer session in a minute, but I'm going to introduce the Mentimeter questions for this session. And I want to thank you for engaging with this tool in the conference so far. I think it's really exciting to be able to gather data from the people in line, in the room, and online, in line. That's how hybrid we are. I'm going to pose a few questions, and I'm going to give you the time throughout the question and answer session to put your answers in. So you won't see those lovely dots racing across the screen this time. I'm really sorry. But what you will have is more time to consider the longer response, those open-ended questions, so that we can feed that information back to people who are developing these apps and tools. Before I go into the questions, I'd like to thank the chairs for today's session, and also Linda Broadhurst and Marlene van der Merwe for helping shape this session and putting the questions together. So I really thank them for their help with that. Okay, you can see the instructions there for joining Mentimeter. You can use the QR code, or you can go to Menti or the Menti app and enter the code 91104522. You can give a thumbs up if you want to. Oh no, you can't, because I've hidden the results. Okay, that's very secret. Okay, so the first question we'd like you to answer is, which app or tool that you've seen presented today would you like to use? Hopefully you can choose more than one. We'd really like you to take these tools and use them. And after afternoon tea, you'll have an opportunity to speak to people who've developed these tools, and they can give you a bit of a demo for a species or your area. You can ask them about that. The next question is an open-ended answer. Is there something that you have seen today that you would like improved, changed, combined with other tools, or combined with other data sets that you know about or you use? Then there's a short answer. Have you seen another tool or an app elsewhere that you find really useful? These will come up in a word cloud so that people will see what else restoration and conservation practitioners are using, maybe it's something you can use as well. And the last question, you can provide a longer response here if you'd like. What are the key gaps you see between the demonstrated tools or ideas and field application? How can we make sure we are implementing the information we have on ground and making sure that it's useful for you? So at the end of the question and answer session, Martin and Maurizio will take you through the answers that you input. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Amelia. Whilst you are answering the questions on Mentimeter, do we have any questions for Tim, Melinda, and Pisa? Too busy on Mentimeter, see? Damn it. Wow.
Well, I'll kick off with no, I'll leave it because I think it's fair. I've got a bit of a bias there. I'll leave that for later.
Okay, I'll ask a question. I was just discussing it with Tim, something like this. It would be great, maybe in the long term, for all of us that are trying to develop apps or web tools that provide outcomes to start to think about joining in and having one single portal. So, I think it would be ideal for Restore and Renew to be in tree search, so we don't have to look after it. I'm just kidding. But ALA would be another opportunity maybe to try to integrate some of those outcomes. It's not a question, it's just a general comment, Tim.
Look, I think that's a really good idea. It's been said here this morning that the research tends to be researchers talking to each other and not disseminating their results to the broader community, and that's where the real impact is. And so I think if we can, everyone's developing apps and databases and interactive maps, and if we can bring them together with various linkages. I'm not a computer engineer, so I could be completely barking up the wrong tree, but if we can bring them together, that's where the real power will be when we start to make all those connections. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I think just the notion of integrating what you're doing with the trees near me and regional vegetation guides, etc. Obviously, there's an obvious link there. I think rather than multiple sites doing similar and overlapping things, try and determine what are the real needs of the people on the ground and how you link those things together.
Yeah, I think it'd be really nice if the Trees Near Me app, when you zoomed in on an area and selected a plant community type that you're interested in, could then also point you towards regional vegetation guides, people doing restoration, and bring it all together in the one place would be fantastic.
Indeed. Do we have a question from?
Yeah, it's not a question, it's a suggestion from Lucy, one of our presenters from the previous session, and it kind of relates to what you've just been talking about. She has said it'd be great to suggest that everyone who's working on these online restoration planning tools, if they could include a link to the Flora Bank guidelines as well to provide information about seed use and restoration.
Yeah, I was thinking before when we were talking the Flora Bank app itself would be a platform that could combine a lot of these things, or at least link them as well.
I think maybe it's also an opportunity to identify which platform is easier to use, and maybe get some feedback on that, and easy to change and update. So feedback from everybody would be very useful as well.
It's Chantal again.
Sean again.
Sorry. Everyone's just
Go for it.
I just had a suggestion while you were talking. It'd be really cool if we could integrate it with some options for volunteers or people to nominate their properties or their resources. I don't know if there's anything around like that. I haven't looked. But, people to say, hey, I'm interested. We have the Blaze Aid database, that kind of thing, like Restore Aid database. That could be fun. No, but I did have a question, and I don't know if anyone can answer this because I'm not really big on genetics, thanks Maurizio, but When you're talking about climate provenancing, and then you're looking at these models and it's like, well, we can't get seed from here anymore in 50 or 80 years. Is anyone able to comment on the likelihood that actually species will adapt or will have some genes turned on that make it more suitable? Does that make sense?
What a great question. I'll let Peter answer that one since you wrote the chapter on far away.
Sorry, I started talking and then realised I was still on mute. You can hear me fine?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's a brilliant question. Like, it is one of these issues, and we are looking into it in terms of how much change a lot of our plants can actually do, so they can still remain fit in their environments. And yeah, it's a bit of a complicated question, because certain life forms are going to generate mutations a lot quicker. So things with short generation times might be able to keep pace with changes in the climate, but a lot of our long-lived species with very long generation times, such as eucalypts, might be a bit more at risk of subtle changes. But just some of the work we're doing down here in Tasmania, we're seeing that there's a sort of genetic signal coming through with sort of drought responses in our native populations, and there is selection filtering out our populations. So it's really those survivors of those populations might be the key seed sources that we need to start targeting. But it's a very tricky question. Like, there's an extent to plastic changes, and there's going to be an extent to their ability to respond. But again, a lot of our species, again, eucalypts, just because that's where I'm mostly working, do have a lot of ability to stay in quite hostile environments.
Can I add something to that? Yeah, great question. I mean, so many of this we don't know, but I guess if we think about the genetic basis for a lot of the traits that we're concerned with, it's kind of they're polygenic traits. It means they're controlled by a whole range of genes. So if everyone in the room, we ranked everyone by height, we'd get a bell curve. So it's under the same thing. Human height's under control of a whole lot of genes. We know it's in a bell curve. Things like flowering time or water use efficiency, so plants' ability to photosynthesize under limited water, that's the same thing. So they are a bell curve too. So what we find is if you go to a plant population that's evolved in a certain habitat, like a dry one, then the bell curve's going to be shifted this direction. So say we're in a wetter condition and it's going to change, what we're doing with the climate-adjusted approach is hopefully selecting some of that variation, that we're flattening out the bell curve, so we're adding in more genetic variation, and so then selection can act on that, and those individuals that are in the proper range and have got that variation are the one that's going to survive. So it's one of those things that's genetic insurance. That's sort of what we're trying to do. And if we don't know everything about, obviously, about plant adaptation, how things evolve, and of course it's not all about climate as well. And that's why we're really trying to think about other environmental variables that drive adaptation, how they might interact as well. But all that to say that if we try and think about maximising that genetic variation and putting the insurance, it's like insurance, you know, we have insurance in case you need it. When we think about this is all essentially genetic insurance. So if things shift, and they will shift, that's having that variation there so that things can adapt and change. And then you get, I mean, that's also the other thing to think about with Peter was just saying there with long-lived species, is if we can put them out in a location and we can monitor how they perform right now, but that's not the end game. Essentially what we want is when those local plants start transferring their pollen with ones from elsewhere, and those new genetic combinations, which we can't, evolution's a random process, we don't really know what's going to come out of that, but that's what we want, that seed to be produced. And so we're setting up a self-sustaining population that hopefully has got the capacity to deal with the what's ahead. So it's complex. I think we just need to be doing things based on good science and the best we know now, but setting them up in a way that we can track it and use genomic tools to actually look at environmental associations with genes as well. So all the great work that's been done in the genetic space and genomic space can be combined with these predictive models to try and give the best idea about what we think might happen. Then, of course, we have to be willing to look at that and monitor that over time. So, great question.
What excellent answers to a very complex question. Thank you.
Hi. Thanks. I guess I just wanted to echo that sentiment of how amazing it is to get that information onto the ground. So I'm representing Landcare New South Wales, and across those 3,000 groups and other community groups, there's such a diversity in, you've got the most knowledgeable ecological restoration group that are chairing a group, and you've got brand new beginners that just want to put stuff in the ground to help. And yeah, I'm just really excited about all these apps coming out. I swear, as a coordinator, I used 50% of my time to get veg mapping. I've already sent the Trees Near Me app to 5 people while you've been doing your talks. I'm like, I found it, it's in an app. So yeah, I guess I'd also love to chat to people more about how we can get these apps into the hands of people on the ground and train them in it, because that's fantastic, and keep doing that.
Hello again. John Delprat from Melbourne Uni, sort of. I'm interested to know whether the panel has a view or any views on whether the better strategy for climate change insurance is towards collecting from a wider range of an existing species, or whether we are tending towards acknowledging that species will move. And then, of course, you get the whole question, and this is not an opinion; it's a question. You get the question then about what we would then consider to be a native weed, and what we would consider to be some sort of reasonable movement of a species into a new location. Now, I understand fully that there are other reasons for why a native plant might become a weed than climate change. I'm not trying to simplify this. I'm just asking the basic question: are we thinking more about trying to broaden the collection area of an existing species in a site, or are we moving to think about allowing species to move, or deliberately moving species into what seems to be dramatically changing areas? Because from that last presentation, if you're sort of no longer able to collect a particular species in Tasmania, now I understand there are other factors there. I'm not suggesting that's the whole story, but if that's the sort of thing we're projecting, then yeah, it's just that. Are we trying to broaden the range of existing species, or are we considering new species into an area?
I can just speak quickly about a very practical example of that for planting and greening Australia. So I'm over in WA, so we're up in the northern wheat belt. And if we look at our site that we're looking to restore up there, and we look at the climate modelling, and you look at species distribution models, for quite a set of those species, they're at the edge of their range right now. So you do the climate modelling, and they're not going to persist into the future. So it led some really tough questions for us to think about, excuse me, that we really want to be setting up something that's going to be there for the future. And when you think about some of plantings have to be going in for carbon, that they also have to persist for that reason, as well as obviously for our biodiversity. So we had to make some hard choices about bringing in species that wouldn't have been our first choice, but they're there, so we're not bringing them in from the not present in that area, but we brought them in to where we wouldn't have potentially had we not thought about this from what's going to happen in the future. So I think it's a real conundrum. It takes a lot of thought and consideration, good modelling, good risk assessment, but we've had to deal with this, and that's how we've done it, is bringing in species because we want to be setting it up for the future. And I think, as Rachel Gallagher has spoken about too, we're thinking about it as function as well. So if this species is a key functional group and it's on the edge of its range, we really need to be maintained with that similar functional group. So that's what we looked at when we were saying, okay, well, we'll bring in these couple of shrub species and choose to put them in our planting because we want them to, A, to perform that function, and B, to persist into the future. I don't know if anybody else has got some things to add to that.
I completely agree, and I think at the end of the day, it will be a combination of both. Just one additional point. In most cases, we cannot rely on the option of the species moving by themselves because there is just not the land there, there's just not the time. So I think in many cases when we're talking about bringing them in, you have to do it yourself. Don't expect things to move over and and move into a new range. It happens, but that's going to be the minority of the cases.
I guess, again, with this moving things because of projected climate change, the assumption is that if something is at the edge of its range, because it's further north or whatever of that area, the plant doesn't occur. But sometimes it's a case of the landfall might be inappropriate. And so your assumption is it doesn't go further north because of the rainfall. It might be just the other factors which are limiting its spread. So the species might be more tolerant of aridity than you think.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's also, if you look at that part of WA, the soils change as well, but it's a gradation. So I guess there's a couple of points there, is we definitely do take that into consideration. And we know that, I mean, genetics is complex too, that there's a lot of like plasticity in plants' response that we could think things are able to cope with more than we expect. I guess the other thing, the other important thing to think about this too, is that when we're looking at these, that we're planting into very degraded agricultural sites. This is what we would probably classify, I'm sure everyone in this room has seen them, as fairly novel environment. It does not, here we're looking at something that's not real, we're not dealing with a nice, pristine, sort of healthy edge of a remnant or anything. We're dealing with a very novel environment. So that sort of adds another complexity with having to have species in there that can cope with what's ahead, but cope with what the current environment is, and the soil being quite different and novel in terms of its composition, its structure, loss of organic material, and all the things that come with, that we've all dealt with of, restoring degraded habitats. So it's definitely complex, and we really do try and bring those things into it when we assess what will grow where, and thinking about the now and thinking about the future as well.
Keep in mind that in some places, I think WA is a good example. Land was cleared so early in the piece that we don't even have the records of what was there, of some of the areas that were cleared. So for some of the species, we don't even know what their natural range would have been to start with.
As a land manager, I'm excited by all these apps, as someone else was back here. And I'm also overwhelmed and by the number of apps and by the amount of information that's within each app. So just a comment, I think it was mentioned before that it's so important for us to be able to have impact, to be able to make connections with land managers. And so I think we spoke about collaboration between the apps. I think that's really important, and being able to speak a common language. I think I may have picked up some differences in language between New South Wales and Victoria, for example. I think it'd be great to have, see that collaboration, usability, all these things to flow through to impact on the ground.
Thank you. Hang on. We've got a question from the web.
Got
two questions from there.
Yep. So the first one's from Zoe Joy Newby, who will be joining us tomorrow for one of the keynote sessions. Is anyone actively collecting data or monitoring plantings which have been set up based on predicted climate shift, i.e. starting to ground truth some of the predictions now, even though we might not expect to see climate change impacts for 20, 30 or 50 years? Anyone like to go at that one?
I can jump in and start that one. So yeah, down in Tassie here, we've been working with Green Australia for the last 10 years, and that's been exactly what we've set up, is to test these predictions, and the ability that we've got with the field trials, we've got them across multiple gradients, and it's range-wide sampling of the species, so we can sort of partition a lot of the different seed sourcing strategies to test how well they perform. And it's still very early days, but there's definitely, I guess, the more interesting question here is how far we can actually start moving things across the landscape. So there are definitely sort of elevation limits to how far we can move things upslope. Surprisingly, we can move stuff from the mainland down to Tasmania and it's perfectly happy. So there's some promising things coming in there, but there's also some very interesting sort of wild cards as well in terms of we're moving populations from the west coast of Tasmania, which receives more than 2,000 centimetres of precipitation, onto a site that receives about 600 centimetres, and they're actually the winners. So that really goes against a lot of the predictions that would be coming out of these types of models. So I guess the take-home question is we need to understand how far we can actually move populations and species across environmental gradients, but also one option isn't going to fit all species. There's some interesting things to discover with all this.
I think that's a great answer. I'll just add a little bit to that, yeah, I think it's really important to recognise that it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all, and I guess that's been the challenge in the past, and it is hard when you've got a list of all these species, which ones does it matter for and which one doesn't. And so we would hope over the future, you know, working with different partners and bringing together all those bits of information, you can start to form, you know, a risk assessment of which ones can we probably be more relaxed about and which ones do we have to be more particular. And it's interesting comparison across Australia for species and across different groups as well. There is definitely some climate adjusted plots over in WA, and Susan Prober at CSIRO has worked in those. There's also some across Victoria, a few of those, and we're actually starting some up in alpine areas with alpine ash, delegatensis. So I think there's a network developing, and Greening Australia does have a resource on our website too of climate future plots, which is essentially trying to give tools so that people could go and whatever you do in your revegetation or restoration, if you want to apply these things, doing it in a way that can be tracked over time. So having a framework to do, because we just really want to encourage people, we really need to have monitoring and evaluation to be able to look at the nows and into the future. So that's another resource that people can look at if you want to know, well, how would I do this for direct seeding or a tube stock planting in the future and track it.
And I'd just add to the whole monitoring and evaluation, it's not just those transferred plants and the plants and how they're performing, but as Tash had said before about having that data of the seed and where seed has come from, and we maintaining those records of where moved material actually originated from. And I think that's a real risk. There's a lot of things moved around, and we're focusing on just the living plants rather than the source of the material, and those options down the track for seed collection and seed transfer zones. And unless we have those systems and longer term tracking of seed, it's where we're just literally scattering seed from the air. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there another question from the web?
Just a comment on that one. There's quite a bit of research going on around the street tree side of things in urban areas, and Melinda mentioned some of that, I guess, referencing that. So which plant where, out of Macquarie, funded by the Horde Innovation side of things, lots of street trees and shrubs looking at which climates are doing well. There's also stuff out at the University of Melbourne, so Stefan Arndt is looking at that for street trees, and a lot of native street trees are in that. And Melinda, you mentioned that Delegatensis thing with Craig Nitschke as well. So there is a bunch of stuff underway. Some of these plantings have already gone in, the which plant where stuff there's already data from. So again, look to the urban systems people. There's a lot of work being done in that which will be relevant.
Another question from the web?
Yeah, so there's another question from Kate. During the conference, regional planning has been suggested for different purposes: to meet the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, to make clear goals for veg restoration in regions, to support scaling up of the seed and plant supply industry. Is there an opportunity to combine these, and any ideas on how this regional planning can be achieved? And Martin, you might want to mention the Healthy Seeds Roadmap. as in answer to that.
Yes, I think I've mentioned a number of times that things happen at a place with people, and that's, you know, it's every location. And someone mentioned yesterday about regional, I think it was Dave Carr, just talking about these things have to be derived from the regions and develop the plans. It's no use, you know, you're not going to drive something from the top down saying this is going to happen if there isn't any desire for it to happen in a region in the first place. So you've really got to have people who are employed in regions with guidance to help and guide these sorts of regional approaches. What is the priorities from the landowner's point of view, from the land manager's point of view, and developing those, identifying what's already there, working with making sure excuse me, that the seed is going to be available and what are the best methods to do these things. It has to happen from a regional approach, and that's really the model that has been suggested through the Healthy Seeds program, and it's working with trying to link with all the research that's going on so that you've got direct links between state and national programs and research to the needs of regions that are identifying issues and objectives that they want to achieve, and what are the barriers to stopping those things happening. You know, unless we can move to that sort of regional approach with the infrastructure support and linkages to the other networks and all these tools, you know, we're all going to be sort of digging our own little holes.
And where do you see the resources coming?
That's a very good question. Yes. If we've only got 5 minutes anyway, so. Yeah. Have we got the Mentimeter results there?
Yep, we're getting them. Yep.
Can't see them.
So Martin and Maurizio are busy discussing that. It looks like there are many people who are keen to use the Restore and Renew web tool, the ALA, all of the tools we've shown today, and Trees Near Me, New South Wales. So that's a fantastic response. Thanks everyone, and great to see that you will take these tools and use them and already sharing them and telling people about them.
Excellent, thank you. And the little side conversation that we're having too was basically about, you know, Maurizio, where are the resources? And that is the key issue, and ultimately it is a political issue in that it requires the federal government, regardless of what we say, and it's been shown in COVID and other things, they set in place process, they don't actually do the things. So resources have got to come from feds to state, devolved to regions for delivery. And that's,
and you can see the results for the next question there now. Something you've seen today that you'd like combined, improved, changed, linked to other apps. Such great suggestions. Yeah, no, go ahead and read them out. Oh, it's too far. Okay. I'd like to see the ALA incorporate living collections data from botanic gardens in Australia and New Zealand. Like the PUCA app available in New South Wales. ALA and Bionet directly integrated. Okay, fantastic. So lots of really good ideas, and within ANPC, it's part of our job to pass information from researchers to people using the information. So we'll take all of these answers, even if we don't get to read them out today. More information and research in Western New South Wales. There's a lot of focus, and we saw that in some of the data sets. Sure. It would be good to have a tool like the Goulbourn Broken tool developed for more areas and veg communities, and there are a number of other similar tools for other areas as well. Fantastic. Trees near me for other states. There you go, Tim. Let's keep you and Adam busy for a while. Yeah, fantastic. I'll go to the next one.
Can we send the results of these out?
Yeah, we'll recap these and put them in an upcoming issue of Australasian Plant Conservation as well. Another app or tool that you find really useful, iNaturalist, yes, and we've heard how that integrates so well with ALA. Thanks for that, Jenna. PlantNet, yeah, New South Wales PlantNet, Esri Open Datasets, Nature Maps in South Australia, Euclid, ProofSafe, that's an interesting one, Landcarer, Fulcrum, Flickr, yeah, Landcarer app. So it'll be really interesting to connect the information and the people and groups already working on it. So maybe when it brings up the veg communities, a tab that says, are you interested in working to restore, or would you like to make a donation to support this area? And you can connect to people doing that work on ground. That would be really interesting. Flickr, yeah, Flickr as a tool for sharing images, definitely. GeoCat, fantastic, great suggestions. Okay, and the one last question here. What are the key gaps that you can see? The species information, lack of investment in remote areas, using them in the field without reception, yes, yes. Robust regional data, recent verified field records. There's an interesting one. Not so many gaps, but a lot of overlap. And if you would just like to keep reading these out, if you can see them, I'll try and scroll through the rest of them so we can see some more. I'll just start scrolling through them. So connectivity, battery life, organisational firewalls can prevent access to some common and widespread tools or apps. So it is true, sometimes you have to take a departmental laptop and then your own resources out as well. Yes, a good point that was picked up earlier, some apps need to be able to exclude the naturalised but not locally native species from the generated plant list, yes, and we've heard about how the regional veg lists do that. We need time. Some of the apps require longer timeframes than the project may allow, definitely. Yes, also letting the community and practitioners know about the app. So it'd be great, Tim, when there's a launch in June of the app and website together, we'll write about it in Australasian Plant Conservation and get it out, Flora Bank website and other places, definitely. The skills to read country, to match the apps with reading land. Yeah, so important, integrating that understanding of country. Fantastic. So all really good responses. I won't hold you up from your afternoon tea, but we can definitely, if you're working on these apps and tools and you're interested in what people would like to see, where they see the gaps are, how they'd like tools combined, by all means, come and have a chat to Joe and myself, and we'll make the best use of these responses to the questions today. I'll let you wrap up the session.
Thank you all, and thank you to all the speakers. And before we go to morning tea, can we please have a round of applause for all the presenters and for all the contributions?